Today in history, on October 10, 732 AD, a brutal battle was waged to decide whether Europe remained Christian or whether it would become Muslim. Exactly 100 years earlier, in 632, Islam's prophet Muhammad died. In the intervening century, his followers swept across and conquered the greater part of Christendom, from Syria and Egypt to North Africa and Spain. By 732, 1 century after Muhammad's death, the scimitar of Islam had reached the very heart of Europe, confronting its greatest military power at the time, the Franks. In 731, the ruthless governor of Al-Andalus conquered Spain, Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, described in sources as a, quote, warlike man, led 80,000 Muslim raiders into Francia, France, where they devastated the countrysides. In the words of an Arabian chronicler, quote, the men of Abd al-Rahman were puffed up in spirit by their repeated successes against the Christians, and they were full of trust in the valor and the practice in war of their emir, Abd al-Rahman. So the Muslims smote their enemies and laid waste the country and took captives without number. And that army went through all places like a desolating storm. Everything gave way to their scimitars, which were the robbers of lives. All the nations of the Franks trembled at that terrible army, and they betook themselves to their king, Charles, and told him of the havoc made by the Muslim horsemen, and how they rode at their will through all the lands. The destruction was profound. In the words of Edward Gibbon, quote, the memory of these devastations, for Abd al-Rahman did not spare the country or the people, was long preserved by tradition. The richest spoil was found in the churches and monasteries which they stripped of their ornaments before delivering to the flames. Alas! What a misfortune, the Franks are quoted as saying. What an indignity! We have long heard of the name and conquests of the Arabs. We were apprehensive of their attack from the east. They have now conquered Spain and invade our country on the side of the west. By the early 730s, Muslims controlled nearly all the great cities between the Pyrenees, the mountains that separate Spain and France, and the Rhone River, slaughtering Christians, burning a bishop alive, and despoiling every church and monastery in their path. The ultimate target was Tours, where Abd al-Rahman imagined he could pillage the Basilica of Saint Martin, in the words of a chronicler. But before he reached that shrine, he found himself face to face with the Lord of Austrasia. Eastern land is what it means, as in eastern France. Charles, a mighty warrior from his youth, continues the same chronicler. There and then, on October 10, somewhere between Poitiers and Tours, Abd al-Rahman's 80,000 Muslim raiders met Charles's 30,000 Christian warriors. An anonymous medieval Arab chronicler describes the battle that followed in the following words. Quote, near the river Loire, the two great hosts of the two languages, Arabic and Latin, and the two creeds, Islam and Christianity, were set in array against each other. The hearts of Abd al-Rahman, his captains and his men were filled with wrath and pride, and they were the first to begin to fight. The Muslim horsemen dashed fierce and frequent forward against the battalions of the Franks, who resisted manfully, and many fell dead on either side, until the going down of the sun. Entirely consisting of wild, headlong charges, the Muslim attack proved ineffective. For, quote, the men of the north stood as motionless as a wall. They were like a belt of ice frozen together and not to be dissolved, as they slew the Arab with the sword. The Austrasians, eastern Franks, vast of limb and iron of hand, hewed on bravely in the thick of the fight, continues the chronicler. The Franks refused to break ranks and allow successive horsemen to gallop through the gaps, which Arab cavalry tactics relied on. Instead, they tightened their ranks and, quote, drawn up in a band around their chief, Charles, the people of the Franks carried all before them. Their tireless hands drove their swords down to the breasts of the foe. As expected, the battle was a wondrous mess. At one point, Allah's warriors surrounded and trapped Charles, but, quote, he fought as fiercely as the hungry wolf falls upon the stag. By the grace of our Lord, he wrought a great slaughter upon the enemies of Christian faith, writes Dennis the chronicler. It was then that he was first called Martel, he continues, for as a hammer of iron, of steel, and of every other metal, even so he dashed and smote in battle all his enemies. As night descended on the field of carnage, the two bloodied armies disengaged and withdrew to their camps. At the crack of dawn, the Franks prepared to resume battle, only to discover that the Muslims had all fled under the cover of darkness. Their master, Abdul Rahman, had been killed in fighting the day before, and the Muslims, many of whom were recently converted Berbers, freed of his whip and having long tasted Frankish metal, apparently preferred life and some plunder over martyrdom. They all fled back south, still looting, burning, and enslaving all and sundry as they went. Aware that his strength lay in his wall of ice, Charles did not give chase. The aftermath is described as a gory mess, with thousands of wounded or dying horses strewn across the field, and abandoned plunder and dead and wounded Arabs everywhere. Few of the wounded were taken prisoner, not least due to their previous record of murder and pillage throughout France and Spain. The oldest sources give astronomical numbers of slain Muslims, with only a small fraction of slain Franks. Whatever the true numbers, significantly fewer Christians than Muslims fell on that day. Even Arab chroniclers refer to the engagement as the pavement of martyrs, suggesting that the earth was littered with Muslim corpses. At any rate, the joyful tidings were soon diffused all throughout Europe, and the surviving chronicles of the day, including that of the aforesaid anonymous Arab, portray this victory in epic if not apocalyptic terms. Indeed, of all the many battles between Islam and Christendom, Tours has, beginning with the contemporary chronicles up until the modern era, been one of, if not the most celebrated in the West. For although the Mediterranean was lost, and although raids on the European coastline became a permanent feature, Islam was confined to the Iberian Peninsula, leaving Western Europe to develop organically, by and large. It is for this reason that, well into the 20th century, leading Western historians, such as Godefroid Kurth, who died in 1916, still saw Tours as, quote, one of the great events in the history of the world, as upon its issue depended whether Christian civilization should continue or Islam prevail throughout Europe. That, of course, was then. This is now. Islam has prevailed throughout Europe, and not through force, but through treachery.